Hello and welcome in. Mark here, aka the Markster. This is video number 84 in the FreeCAD series. Today we'll be looking at a macro called Animator, and I will be using version 0.20, revision 26554. This is one of the development builds. And first, let's look at installing the macro. So we'll go to Tools menu, Add-on Manager, Macros, and we're going to look for Animator. I've already got it installed, but you would click the Install Update Selected button here, and now you've got it installed and it's available in the Macros menu as Animator. Yours may be uppercase, mine is lowercase because I wrote it here. Now the first time you run the macro, it's going to ask to create a file. You tell it to create the file. And then when you go back to macros, you have two files. One has the .fc macro extension, and the other has the animator.py extension. Let me run my magnifying glass utility here so maybe you can see a little better there. When you uninstall Animator, you can do so just by deleting both of these files here within the macros dialog. Delete button right there. So we've got the Animator Object now created because we ran the macro. And we need some objects in our document that we can animate. So I'm going to go to Part Workbench, and I'll add two cubes. So cube and cube 001. And now we need to refresh the animator. Since we created the cube objects after the animator was already created, we need to refresh it so that it will know about these two objects. And we do that with the animator property called refresh. So we click that to true. It refreshes itself and sets that property back to false. You see now it's false again. That's how it's supposed to work. And once refreshed, if we scroll down the property view, you will see animator variables. So the way the variables work is we bind a property of the document to each variable. And we do that by selecting the property here in this drop-down list. This list was populated when we did the refresh command a moment ago. It gets populated when the animator object is created. So we could have also deleted the animator and run the macro again, and it will populate itself based upon the objects in existence in the document at the time of creation. And then if we need to refresh that, if we added some objects, or if we deleted some, then we can refresh here. Okay, we'll talk about these properties here a little bit later, but first let's get an animation going. So here with variable 1, I'm going to select box.height. Then to get the animation started, double click the Animator Object in the tree view. And we're looking at it from the top. So we didn't see the height get animated. We can double click it to do it again. So notice here in the tree view, we get a little countdown indicator showing the progress. And we can double click to stop it at any time. So I'm double clicking. Now notice when I double click to start another animation, it starts back from where it was. And at the end of the animation, the height property is now remains at 100. And you can see here the second cube was not animated because it wasn't part of the animation process. We can add it by adding another property by binding another property to variable 2. So this time I'll choose box 001. Let's see, width. So we'll animate the width of one and the height of the other. Let's do that again so we can see it. Now if we want the property to return to its original position at the end of the animation, what we need to do is set a formula to for example, the height property here. We'll click this FX button or press equals on the keyboard and enter 10 there. So now you see in the property view that there is a formula attached to this height property for the cube, but not for cube 001. So if we run the animation again, one of them will return at the end and the other did not. You can interact with FreeCAD while the animation is ongoing. So lesson 1 is assign the property a formula if you want it to return to its original value at the end of the animation. If you want it to retain the final property value at the end of the animation, then do not set a formula to that property. We can also move the objects and not just change their dimensions. Any property may be animated, and that includes the placement property. So let's look at the placement here, and let's say position X is the one we want to animate, and we want it to return to 0. So I'm pressing the equals key, 0, and OK. So now it's set with the blue type there, indicating that there is a formula attached to that property. And that's going to be cube base placement position X. So we'll go down here to the animator and we choose variable number, that's number 3, and we'll select box placement base.x as our variable to animate. Now you'll notice in the case of the cube, the box is the name of the object and the label is cube, and that can be confusing. Luckily there aren't many objects to which this applies, only the cube. Why, I don't know. Originally maybe it was called a box and then they decided to call it a cube, but they left the box name. I think box personally is a better name because a cube implies all the sides are the same length, which is not the case with the box. So to find out the name of the object, and you might also change the label on your own, and you might not remember the name, you can hover over it with the mouse and then look at the bottom in the status bar and it'll show you the name, the internal name. You might not be able to see that on your screen. It's a small text. You can also select it, and if you have the Python console open, you'll see a little line at the bottom. Let me see if I can get that on screen for you. Add selection. Here we are. It'll say GUI selection, add selection, and then the name of the object. So that's another way you can figure out the name of your object. You can also select the object. I know I'm beating a dead horse here. Press Control-Shift-P, and that creates a variable and sends it to the Python console called obj. Then you can enter obj.name, enter, and it will give you the name of that object. Get that magnified for you. And some new builds of 0.20, a new feature has recently been added. When you press Control-Shift-P with an object selected, it will open the Python console for you if it's not already open. And it'll set the keyboard focus. So you can just start typing right away, obj.name, capital N, to get the name of the object. So 3 ways there to get the name of the object. Now let's run this animation. You see that one's moving and growing. It's a really simple way to add an animation to your model. No Python coding required. You just point and click, select objects, select the properties to animate here, and double click to get the animator object going. Notice the icon. It's what they call it, a clapboard, I believe, in the movie industry. They clap the little thing together and it enables them to synchronize the audio and the video. Well, while it's animating, the little clapper is closed, and while it's not, it's open. It might be hard to see. Let's see if I can get that on there. See how when it's animating, it's closed. Alright. So and we can add more variables if you want to add more. By default there are 3. You see variable count here, 3. So you can add, if we wanted 5, we'd have 5. And then go down, and now you've got 5 in there. So you're not limited to just 3. You can have as many as you want. You can have 1,000,000, I think, if you want. I probably added some maximum. I don't remember. It's been a while since I made this. But obviously if you have too many, it's going to really bog down FreeCAD. You don't have to use them in order. You can, for example, reset this back to select property and then just use the other 2. So each variable is bound to a property. Now this property can be property of the object like we've been using so far, but it could also be an alias from a spreadsheet or a named constraint from a sketch. Must be a named constraint or an alias spreadsheet cell or a property. If it's a property, the property needs to be something you can assign a number to, and it cannot be hidden. So some properties are hidden for some objects. You would not be able to animate it if it's a hidden property. At the bottom of the property list, we have settings advanced. See that section? We have blacklisted objects that we don't want to add to the list of properties to be selected. So by default, the origin properties, these are the origin objects in the part design workbench inside of a body, or a part container has the same things. For example, let's go to part design here, create a body. You see this origin object. These things are not by default part of the selection list. And we also have supported, which are the property types that are supported. So you could edit these and add other blacklisted objects that you don't want to appear in this list, which can get quite long with a lot of stuff in your model. So these are blacklisted object types. And you could also add to supported or remove from supported the types of properties that you would like to add to the list or not add to the list. But just keep in mind you need to be able to assign a number to those properties for it to work. So each variable has these properties associated with it. We have the property that's bound to the variable that we select in here. We have nth. Let me put the magnifier on here. Nth means apply the animation every nth iteration through the loop. By default this is 1. So the animation gets applied to that property every time through the loop. if we hit a 2 right here, then only every second loop would the animation get applied to that property. So we can sort of skip frames with this to make the animation a little more smooth, I guess you could say. We have the start here, and start is your starting value. By default, that's 0. So for example, when we move that cube, we start at 0 and move to 100. But we can start at a different value if we wanted to, instead of 0. Step is the amount by which to increment the property each time through the loop. So when we move the cube 100 millimeters, 1 millimeter per iteration through the loop, it ends up at 100. X equals 100. If we had 2 right here and we're for step, then it would be 2 millimeters each time through the loop. Let's go back to the nth property. One more thing needs to be kind of explained there. If you skip loops, then the animation catches up when it gets applied. So if we had right here where nth is, if we had, let's say, 4 there instead of 1, then we would only do an animation of that property every 4th time we go through the loop. But it would be 4 millimeters each time. So it's still going to end up in the same spot at the end. If you want to only do 1 millimeter every 4th time through, then you would set the step to 0.25, and that way you could achieve that goal of 1 millimeter of movement every 4th time through the loop if you had 4 as that nth property. So each of these are on a per variable basis. You can kind of think of that as a local variable, a local property for that variable. But some of these up higher here are global. So the frames property is global. Frames property applies to every variable. Initial delay. So when you set the animation to start, for example, by double clicking the animator, you can set an initial delay, and this would be in seconds. So if you want to delay the animation by 5 seconds, you can set this to 5 and do the animation. You see, it doesn't start until 5 seconds later. That would give you some time to get a recorder going, or whatever you want to do before the animation starts. The default there is going to be 0. We already talked about refresh and what it does. Show progress defaults to true. So that gives you the little numbers here in this section. 2 out of 20 and so on. 2 out of 100, 50 out of 100, etc. You can turn that off if you want. It probably speeds things up a little bit without having that. Sleep is the amount of time to sleep during each time through the loop. And this is also in seconds. So let me set the frames to 10, so we only do 10 frames. And sleep to 1, so we sleep 1 second each frame, and see what that does. You see the wisdom of going to 10 frames instead of 100. Of course, we can always stop the animation by double clicking again on the animator. All right. Start animating and stop animating. That's two alternative ways to begin the animation or stop the animation. So these work as trigger properties, like the refresh property. By trigger, I mean they trigger a command to be executed and then set themselves back to false. Refresh does this. Start animating and stop animating all do this. They set themselves back to false and then execute the command. See, that command was to start animating. And this one would be to stop. The interaction is kind of slow while the animation is going on. Or you can just double click the Animator Object to start and stop the animation. At the top of here, we have 3 more properties. A2 plus solve, false. ASM3 solve, and ASM4 solve. So these are for working with assemblers. So we have 3 assembly workbenches in FreeCAD at this time. A2 plus, Assembly 3, and Assembly 4. And each of these workbenches have a solve command in those workbenches. And that command tells it to solve the assembly. So by setting one of these to true, each time at the end of each loop, that assembly solve command will be called, and the assembler will solve the assembly each time through. Now let's add a sketch. And I'm going to add a circle to the sketch. And I'll constrain that to 10mm radius. And I'm going to delete the cubes. And I'm going to refresh the animator. Right, now let's look at the animator. Variable 1. So we have some body properties, we have some sketch properties, but we don't see the radius, do we? Because we did not name that constraint. So let's add a name to that constraint. Double click it right here and we'll call this radius. Radius. Close the sketch. Select the animator. And we come down to sketch. We don't see radius. Why not? Well, we need to refresh it again. Set refresh to true. Select property, sketch constraints radius. So that's the property we want to animate. And we're going to start it at 10. 0 would give us an error. We'll do 1 millimeter per time through as a step value. And the frames will be 50. Now let's put an initial delay of 2 seconds. Alright, now let's see if this is going to work. We'll double click the animator. We've got a sleep of 1 second here. Let's put that to 0. It's hard to do while it's going, so let me stop it. 0. Now let's try this again. Okay, that was much smoother. So initial delay of 2 seconds. And we go from 10 to 60. Right, because 50 frames. Start at 10. 1 each. So now it's at 60. We could set that to a formula somewhere, for example in a spreadsheet, and it would set itself back to the initial value if that's what you wanted. We can do the same thing with named constraints in a spreadsheet. I don't think I need to go through that. It's already over half an hour on the video. So let's go ahead and wrap it up. That's the animator macro. It makes it easy to do animations. You animate the properties. So hopefully there are no bugs in FreeCAD that you're getting unexpected results. If you do find that situation, check the properties and make sure they're being animated as you expect. And then it's a bug in FreeCAD if it's not working right. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.